Good afternoon and welcome to the 737th meeting of the Economic Club of New York. I'm Barbara Van Allen, President and CEO of the club. The Economic Club of New York is known as the nation's leading nonpartisan forum for discussions on social, economic, and political issues. We've had more than 1,000 prominent guest speakers appear before the club over the last century and have established a strong tradition of excellence, which continues up to today. In 2020, the club launched its equity and inclusion programming, and it continues to this day and into the future. We're not doing this work alone. We always like to give thanks to those that have supported us, and that includes our corporate partners, BlackRock, MasterCard, PayPal, S&P Global, and Taconic Capital, as well as the many members, speakers, and subject matter experts that are now and will be engaged in this work. I'd like to also extend a warm welcome to students joining us digitally from NYU, the Gabelli School of Business at Fordham, and Mercy University, as well as members of our largest ever class of 2023 fellows, a select group of diverse rising next-gen business thought leaders. As a reminder, applications for our 2024 program are available on the club's website right now, and applications are actually now rolling in. It is truly my honor today to welcome our guest of honor, Club Trustee William Lewis. Bill is a partner and a member of the firm's leadership team at Apollo. He most recently served as managing director and chairman of investment banking at Lazard, where he advised global corporations on corporate and financial matters, including leverage buyouts and other M&A activity. Previously, Bill spent 24 years with Morgan Stanley in a variety of leadership roles, including global M&A, global corporate finance, and Morgan Stanley Realty. In 1989, he became Morgan Stanley's first African-American managing director. He also chaired its charitable foundation and diversity task force. Bill earned his undergraduate degree and MBA from Harvard University, and today serves as a member of the Harvard Management Company, which is responsible for the university's $42 billion endowment. He also serves on the boards of numerous nonprofit organizations in addition to ours, including Uncommon Schools, the New York Presbyterian Hospital, the New York City Police Foundation, the Posse Foundation, the City Fund, and the National Constitution Center. In addition to his nonprofit work, Bill serves on the board of Ariel Alternatives, LLC, and formerly served on the boards of Freddie Mac and Darden Restaurants. The format today will be a conversation in which we're honored to have back Frank Holland, anchor at CNBC, as our moderator. Time permitting, he'll take questions also from those on our webinar that are in the chat box. As a reminder, this conversation is on the record, and we do have media on the line. So without further ado, Bill and Frank, this time is yours.
Barbara, thank you so much. And Bill, it's really an honor to be here to talk with you about your 45-year journey on Wall Street, all your accomplishments, and also your efforts to increase diversity and inclusion in the financial services industry. But first, if you don't mind, I'd love to talk a little bit about you and where you come from. So I've heard you say you're a country boy from Richmond, Virginia. Tell us a little bit about how you started your life and how you got to where you are.
Well, I am a country boy from Richmond, Virginia. I was born in a segregated hospital in Richmond 2 years after Brown v. Board of Education. My father was a roofer. My mother was a maid. I went to segregated schools in Richmond through the 8th grade. And I must say, it wasn't all bad, and we can talk about that if you'd like. It prepared me pretty well, and I won a scholarship through the Better Chance program, ABC, to go to Andover, where I spent 4 years, and that was the beginning of my journey.
Okay, you went on to Harvard as well, not only Harvard undergrad, but Harvard Business School. But you believe Andover, that was really an inflection point for you, at least from an educational perspective. Give us a sense. Why?
Well, education would be a part of it, but Andover was so much more to me than just an academic education. It was certainly an education. But I left Richmond, as I said, segregated schools in 1970, and it was my first plane ride. I had never visited Andover. I had only seen it in the form of a map. Obviously, there was no internet or anything along those lines. I'd seen the brochures. But Andover was and still is a 500-acre campus about 25 miles northeast of Boston, and it couldn't be more different than Richmond, Virginia. And I loved it from day one. It was ripe with every possible opportunity you could imagine. Obviously, academics, but athletics as well. A variety of people. I like to joke that my freshman roommate at Andover was a guy named Jim Armstrong from the Armstrong Ranch in Armstrong, Texas. So his background is a little bit different from mine. His mother, Ann Armstrong, ultimately became the ambassador to the Court of St. James. He was on the board of American Express. So he came from a background that was a little bit different from mine. But once again, I chalk that up to Andover. One of Andover's mottos is youth from every quarter. And putting those two kids together as two 14-year-olds epitomized the notion of youth from every quarter. So I could talk forever about my 4 years at Andover. It, in fact, was an inflection point, and it shaped my sort of worldview then and now, quite frankly.
So it sounds like despite the fact you two being from very different worlds, you became friends. That's something that's a theme throughout your career, your ability to not only work, but just get along with a variety of people. I want to hit on one other theme that I know you want to talk about. Pursuing your passion, taking calculated risks, and really articulating your goals. So if we can move forward, why don't we start about your journey at Morgan Stanley? You articulated your goals when you joined Morgan Stanley. Talk to me about your goals that you articulated and how it all played out.
Sure. Quickly, I sort of backdoored my way into Morgan Stanley. I majored in economics at Harvard, and I thought I wanted to be an economics professor. And about halfway through my senior honors thesis, for my senior year, I had an epiphany that the study of economics really wasn't for me, and I wanted to pursue business in some form or another. And I applied to Harvard Business School and to Stanford Business School. And in those days, you could get admitted directly. You didn't have to take time off the way they require you to do now. And so I was admitted directly to Harvard Business School and Stanford Business School. And then I decided I didn't want to go. That 4 years at Andover, 4 years at Harvard, sort of 8 years of slugging away. I wasn't prepared to do another 2 years right away. I wanted some sort of break, but it was late in the interviewing season. And most companies had come and gone. And I was able to rustle up a couple of interviews, one at Morgan Stanley, one at what was then called First Boston, a couple of other places, one at Procter & Gamble. And I very quickly had to make a decision as to whether or not I wanted to start a career like at a Procter & Gamble or the 2-year programs that the investment banks and the consultants had. I concluded I wanted to do investment banking. That decision was easy. Morgan Stanley made me an offer, First Boston didn't. And so that's how I ended up at Morgan Stanley. I enjoyed Morgan Stanley tremendously. In a lot of ways, it was like my first arrival at Andover. It was totally new. I'd never been exposed to Wall Street, never really heard much about Wall Street. In fact, Morgan Stanley was not on Wall Street. Morgan Stanley was right down the street here at 5th and 6th Avenue in what was then called the Exxon Building. I was attracted to the M&A department, which was a fairly new effort in the late 70s. but it was exciting, tremendously exciting. It was analytically based, which was my background. Before I thought I wanted to be an economist, I thought I wanted to be an engineer. And so I've always been analytically based. And the M&A business back then, and quite frankly, today, is very much analytically oriented. And so I felt very at home during my 2 years at Morgan Stanley as an analyst.
You know, if time permits, I would love to ask you about your story about how the analyst program started, but we want to focus on you. That's a little deep tease for everybody out there. So for everybody, here's kind of the plot twist if this were a movie. So you get to Morgan Stanley, you enjoy it, you set a goal of becoming partner. Talk to us about how that all played out.
Yeah, that I actually didn't think about my goals until I came back to Morgan Stanley after Harvard Business School. And I literally wrote on the back of an envelope, the envelope I still have today, 43 years later, my sort of life goals,
right,
of which Morgan Stanley was a part. But I set a goal of becoming a partner at Morgan Stanley in 8 years, which was the time frame to make partner in those days at Morgan Stanley. And I thought I would want to work another 10 years as a partner. So that would take me to, call it age 44. And the notion of making partner at a place like Morgan Stanley in those days was a really big deal. And hanging around for 10 years as a partner was even a bigger deal.
I think it still is.
And so that was sort of the first leg of my journey and my set of goals.
All right, so you become partner within the time frame you said, I believe even a year earlier than you originally said.
That's correct.
And then you and a good friend, you become partners together, but they decide to leave a week after making partner. So you decided to stay, and this is kind of the plot twist. Looking back at it, how do you view that decision?
Yeah, I've talked about that that decision, that analysis a lot, including this morning to somebody I was mentoring. My colleague, my good friend, I hope he doesn't mind me mentioning his name, Bob Lindsay, and I had started as analysts at Morgan Stanley in 1978, and then we'd gone off to business school. We came back as associates in 1982. We both got promoted early. We both made partner in 7 years. And so in 1989, I thought I had died and gone to heaven, having made partner at Morgan Stanley. And Bob quit.
Did it surprise you?
It sort of did, but he went on to found a company called that we know today as Lindsay Goldberg and Bessemer. And so he did just fine, and he has his name on the science building up at St. Paul's, and my name is not on the science building at Andover. So he did just fine. The whole point of that story, and I've told it over and over and over again, is all about risk.
Mm-hmm. Calculated risk.
Calculated risk. My background, as we've discussed, was very different than Bob Lindsay. Bob's uncle was Mayor Lindsay, Mayor John Lindsay, and Bob's father was a senior manager, I think it was president actually, or chief operating officer at what was then called Morgan Guarantee. So Bob had a very different sort of risk profile, a very different safety net than I had. And Bob had a worldview and a perspective on what private equity was. I didn't stumble upon that perspective until 2 years ago.
When you joined Apollo.
When I joined Apollo. So it was a calculated risk. I concluded that for me, given where I had come from, not that far back, that making partner at Morgan Stanley was a pretty good deal.
It sounds like a pretty good deal. So from that inflection point, looking back, obviously during the time you stayed at Morgan Stanley for years to come.
24 years.
But looking back at it, what lesson do you think you learned about risk and pursuing passion?
As I articulated, and as I tell people all the time, you really have to be self-aware. You have to take calculated risk. You can't sort of jump into something without a safety net. And I didn't feel as if I had a safety net to be able to sort of leave Morgan Stanley in 1989. I was also quite passionate about the business. I enjoy the business and still do today. It's a different part of the business, but to me, being in the middle of M&A battles, advising some of the most prestigious companies, clients around the world. When I was in 1984, I had to travel to Australia 6 times during the summer of '84. That was pretty exciting. Advising a company in Australia that had 3 pursuiters actually, one in Australia, one in Chicago, and one in London. So there was a passion for me about the M&A business, and combining that passion with the sort of safety net / risk profile that I had for myself, made the decision for me to stay at Morgan Stanley quite easy.
All right, we'll talk more about pursuing passion, taking risk in a bit. But as you mentioned, you stayed at Morgan Stanley for 24 years, then you went to Lazard, and then you went to Apollo, of course. Talk to us about that journey and the things that you learned along the way, the things you learned about yourself and also about the financial services industry.
Well, I should have referenced this a little bit earlier. I've always been focused on bringing others along. So when we talk about the journey, I've always been mindful of the opportunity that was provided to me, and as a result, the opportunity that I've got to provide to others. This is what makes being at Apollo so fascinating today. Our foundation is called the Apollo Opportunity Foundation, and it's focused on opportunity. And if I had to pick sort of one word that has sort of permeated my being since I got out of Andover, since I got out of Harvard, it would be about providing opportunity for others. So when I got out of Harvard College, I joined the board of A Better Chance at age 22. I don't advise that. You don't know anything at age 22, but my heart was in it. And all along at Morgan Stanley, I started to focus on diversity and inclusion before that was a fashionable concept. I helped create a program at Morgan Stanley in the early 90s, which we named after the chairman at the time, Richard B. Fisher, the Richard B. Fisher Scholars Program, where we concluded we had to open up the funnel. We had to see more diverse talent to make sure we had the best people on the field. And what I learned, what I saw at Morgan Stanley and at other firms, quite frankly, was that during the interview process, the most junior people at Morgan Stanley were tasked with culling the list of resumes to figure out who we were going to interview. And the logic behind that wasn't all bad, because a first-year analyst who was 1 year out of Harvard or Yale or wherever could look at a resume and sort of decipher it for us, could tell us that, that was a gut course, that blah, 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 whatever. And so that was the thinking. But the result was that you ended up with a lot of people who looked like our current employees. And so what I realized was when we did bring in kids of color to interview with Morgan Stanley, they were amazingly talented, but they didn't have, for lack of a better phrase, the lingo down. Mm-hmm. My kids have had the great fortune of sitting around the breakfast table, the lunch table, the dinner table with me their entire lives, and so the lingo is second nature. If the first time you're sort of hearing the lingo is when you interview as a junior or a senior in college, the rap just isn't the same, and that can cause you to stumble. And so I came up with a really simple idea, which was let's identify some kids as sophomores in college, and basically begin a 2-year interview process with them, so that they can walk around, they can get a feel for the culture, they can get a feel for the lingo, they can understand that what we do is not rocket science. This is what I've said forever and ever and ever. This business is not rocket science, but there are, some tricks to the game. There are sort of certain rules. You've got to understand how certain things are done, how certain things are said. And so with the Richard B. Fisher Scholars Program, we expanded our recruiting efforts to 5 or 6 HBCUs and began to bring kids in sort of halfway through college as opposed to at the end of their college careers.
So as part of these diversity efforts, what would you say about Wall Street in 1982? What's the difference between then and now as you see efforts to diversify? Apollo is actually part of an effort to diversify as well with alt finance. There are a number of other programs out there, but what did you see back in 82? What are you seeing now?
Well, frankly, with respect to the traditional investment banks, we've moved backwards. When I joined Morgan Stanley in 1978, there were more African-American officers and senior associates in the traditional investment banking business, what I call corporate finance or M&A, than there are today.
Really?
Yes.
That's pretty surprising.
Yeah, it is surprising. Now, that's not the full picture. There are lots of other areas within an investment bank. There are obviously global capital markets. The new CEO of Morgan Stanley, Ted Pick, came up through equity capital markets. Right. So, so I'm sort of focused on the corporate finance and the M&A because those are the client-facing business. Those are the traditional businesses within an investment bank. But today, you would see, obviously in terms of numbers, a lot more people of color on Wall Street, but dispersed throughout a wide variety of situations. And my great concern is that you're going to have fewer people advancing on a traditional investment banking career and on some of the more support areas within an investment bank. That's the biggest difference that I have noticed. The second big difference, and I think it's a good change, is that that more kids of color are focused now on the private equity business, on the wealth management business. That is the future of Wall Street, and I think that the fact that, well, not the fact that, but I think we have to do more to make sure that that kids of color in college can understand the difference between asset management, private equity, traditional investment banking, commercial banking. You have to realize even today, and I wouldn't have thought this 45 years ago when I started my journey, but even today, a lot of kids of color don't make a real distinction. It's like, I've got a business card with a firm that's in finance, and I'm the first in my family to go to college. Mm-hmm. And by extension, I'm the first in my family to work at one of these big name firms. And they're not in a position to think ahead 10, 15 years from now. And that's one of the things that I, along with a number of my colleagues within my cohort, spend a lot of time on, trying to help young people of color understand that there are so many different paths to pursue in finance today, unlike when I started, but that you've got to be really, really, really careful, because once you start down one path, it's really difficult to put that car in reverse, go back and start down another path.
So what's the answer to this disbursement that you're really concerned about? Speaking of Morgan Stanley, I often talk to Morgan Stanley's Chief Human Resource Officer, Mandel Crawley, and he says one of the things they do is they look for people he calls athletes, people with talents in other industries that they can pull into the business Is that the answer? Is there something else that needs to be done to increase the pipeline?
Let me make sure I understand the question.
Yeah.
Just increase the pipeline to a Morgan Stanley or to a particular part of the business?
To every part of the business, especially the consumer-facing ones where you feel some concern about a lack of representation or at least the numbers decline.
Yeah, I don't think, so to be clear, Wall Street can always do better, but Wall Street has done a pretty good job of attracting kids of color to the street.
Got it.
Where I'm splitting hairs is sort of where within the street.
Right.
And I don't want to disparage any particular department. I certainly don't want to make a kid feel that he or she has ended up in the wrong part. But I think young people, and this is what I did, going back to my envelope coming out of business school, I think young people have to think about where they want to be in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Now, having said all of that, because I am the father of 4 young adults, people don't think that way anymore. If I were to tell one of my kids to map out where you want to be in 15 or 20 years, they would have me committed. It would sound like such a ludicrous request. So you have to overlay my earlier comments with the fact that that millennials and Gen Xers, I guess Gen Zs, really, it's almost anathema. It's foreign to them to sort of think about where they want to be in 10 or 15 years. 2 of my kids are involved in startups, right, as an example, and one is a Marine. And he knows he has a 4-year tour of duty. But beyond that, it's not clear to me that he's thought a lot about where he wants to be sort of during the next 4 years. So you must add on that sort of environmental element, which is young people are different today.
Maybe you need to hand them some envelopes. They can write down their plans like you, and then 40 years later.
Well, first of all, they don't know how to write. I mean, everything is, with devices, but yeah.
Let's talk more about your journey.
Yeah.
So you mentioned you were very happy at Morgan Stanley, but then you get a call from a friend. You have a lot of friends, by the way. We're going to touch on that too. You get a call from a friend that says, hey, why don't you come over here to Lazard? Let's talk about that switch.
So I have to, and I always, in a public setting, give a shout out to one of my dearest friends, Gary Park. Gary and I have parallel stories in a certain sense. We both are from Richmond, Virginia. We both were born in the same hospital around the same time. I was born in 56 and he was born in 57, but he was born in the white ward and I was born in the segregated colored ward. And we met for the first time in February of '87 when we both were at Morgan Stanley. And Joe Perella, who was our boss at the time, I was running the real estate department and he was running the financial institutions group. And Joe Perella asked us to go run Morgan Stanley's global M&A department. And so I'd never really met Gary. Gary had joined from Wasserstein Perella, and we didn't sit together. And I called him and I said something along the lines of, be gentle with this country boy from Richmond, Virginia. And he responded in a similar fashion, hey, I'm a country boy from Richmond, Virginia. and we've been close friends ever since. In any event, Gary left Morgan Stanley in 2003 and went to Lazard. And as soon as he got to Lazard, he said, Bill, you would love it over here. It's very much like the Morgan Stanley in the old days, focused largely on M&A and strategic work. And it's all about clients, and Lazard had no sort of capital markets to speak of. So it's a very miniature version of a part of Morgan Stanley. And I thought about it, and Bruce Wasserstein had recently joined Lazard and was reshaping the firm. And so I began to chat with a few of them, and I I agreed with Gary. And so I joined Gary a year later in 2004.
All right. And then
that was how I got to Lazard.
there you go. And then about 2 years ago, you got a call once again.
Yeah, Gary decided to leave Lazard at some point and came to Apollo. And not soon thereafter, he called me and said, Bill, I really think you would enjoy Apollo. It's very entrepreneurial. It is growing like weeds. There are lots of places where you could bring your skill set, both externally and internally. I had spent, obviously, 40 plus years working with, many of the top corporations, top CEOs, top boards. And there was a very obvious desire to sort of bring that sort of network to what Apollo was doing, the kind of solutions that it was bringing to corporate America as well, but internally as well. I had managed lots of different kinds of departments within Morgan Stanley. I had started the partner promotion process at Lazard. And one of the first things I was asked to do when I joined Apollo was to chair, the co-chair, the partner promotion process here at Apollo. We didn't have one. And so I had Gary rightly noted that I had some attributes, some skills that would work well here, both internally and externally at Apollo. And so I started talking to the team here, actually during the pandemic, and came over in the fall of 2021.
All right, so that's a big part of your journey. I want to talk more about how you made this incredible journey, again, from being a country boy in Richmond, West Virginia, to now at Apollo.
You said West Virginia?
Oh, sorry, Richmond, Virginia. I apologize. I'm sorry. Don't want to insult you. Richmond, Virginia, I should say. Excuse me. You're a deal maker. That's been your whole career, making deals, being, facing the client, working with other people from other companies. Talk to us about that. What's your philosophy when it comes to making deals, working with other people? You are a very affable person, but not everybody in Wall Street is that way.
Yeah, I can't speak to others on Wall Street, but my view has always been pretty straightforward. First of all, as I said, I've loved M&A. That's been the backbone to my career. And it sort of goes without saying that when you're trying to put two companies together, when you're trying to effect a merger, you have two parties that sort of have a different perspective on things. And so it does require some combination of negotiation and valuation and people skills and being able to read a room. But bottom line, Frank, I like to say, is that if I can't get a deal done, then I can't feed my kids. I can't send them to college. And so in the M&A business, you only get paid when a deal gets done. And a deal only gets done when you can sort of bring two parties together. And typically, the kind of things that I've been involved in, people know that intellectually, and people realize that they can't get everything they want. And so it's the art of the possible. And I've never found it more complicated than that. Yes, I am affable. Some would beg.
I don't think there's many.
I enjoy people. I have lots of networks. I try to keep them all connected via email and chat and what have you. And I wake up in the morning to the chagrin of many people, sort of, connecting people, and I go to bed at night connecting people.
So you really enjoy being around people. Do you think that's been the secret?
I didn't say that.
You are saying that. You enjoy talking, communicating, getting people together. Do you think that's been the secret to your success? The fact that you don't just want to do deals, you want to be involved with other people, you want to get to know them, you want to work with them, not just to get to a goal.
I enjoy getting to know people and understanding people. I I'm always curious as to where a person is from. Billy, in your case, I there's always a way to connect through where you're from, what your parents did, where'd you go to school, what sports did you play, and I enjoy those sort of touch points. What I don't enjoy, is sort of idle chit chat. I can't do that. So people can confuse being affable with making small talk. I can't really make small talk, or I can't make it for more than 10 minutes. And so I'm always trying to go down a rabbit hole on something that's interesting about you. And that's one of the beauties of playing golf. You're on the golf course with somebody for 4 hours, and you can, in addition to enjoying yourself and enjoying the 6.5-mile walk, you can really learn about a person through direct conversation, but also through observation. And so I enjoy that aspect of human nature. But don't ask me to walk into a cocktail party and make chit chat. I'm not particularly good at that.
All right, we are starting to run out of time. So if anyone has a question, this would be the time to put it here in the chat. Before we wrap up, though, I want to get your takeaway. People spend some time listening about your journey, your efforts to diversify the financial services industry. What's the big takeaway you want people to have from this conversation?
Well, there's a lot. But first and foremost, we went through a tremendous soul-searching period during the pandemic on so many different levels. We questioned so many things about our nation's psyche, about our values, about basic rights. This whole concept of DEI really came into focus. We're in a very, very divisive period right now on so many different levels. It's almost impossible to have a thoughtful conversation with thoughtful people about so many of the hot button issues today. I believe that we should all be about trying to define opportunity and make opportunity available. It is not always easy. In fact, it's hard, and it requires being thoughtful and creative. The easy stuff has been done. The low-hanging fruit has been done. And so even though I've been at this for 45 years, I'm still motivated, inclined to figure out what are the additional ways, the additional things that we can do to create opportunity. And by the way, what's so important today is to make sure, is to differentiate between the notion of creating opportunity and taking something from somebody and giving it to somebody else. It doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. And much of the political discourse has led us to conclude that this person or this group can only advance if this person or this group is held back. And so the great challenge and the great opportunity for us is to figure out how we continue to expand the pie, that this is not a zero-sum game. And that's and that's the backbone of my professional experience. I mean, M&A is, it's a losing game if you frame it as zero-sum. It's always got to be win-win. And so my whole professional mindset has been win-win. And what I do in my spare time with respect to bringing others along is to convince people that it is win-win.
Amazing. Bill, you've had an amazing career on Wall Street. Your efforts to diversify, your family having great success just all across the board. If Ken Frazier's watching, we got to get you down to Philly, do a little cheesesteak tour. But on a serious note, it's really been a pleasure. I want to thank you for your time and sharing your story and just talking about everything that you're doing to not only increase diversity and inclusion, but as you said, opportunity. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, Frank.
Barbara, back over to you.
Well, thank you both. What a great conversation and so many insights. And wow, Bill, I mean, this is the kind of conversation that the club really wants to have with leaders like you. So thank you for making that possible today. We have two more great events coming up. And as always, we encourage our members to bring their guests. On December 7th, Bill Gates is going to receive the Peter G. Peterson Award at a dinner event. So there's still room for seats and tables there. So do consider it. December 11th, we'll have a luncheon with club member Brad Jacobs. We'll welcome him back. Actually, he's chair of XPO Logistics. You'll remember we had him speak a couple years ago on the supply chain issues we were experiencing during COVID. That same evening, we're going to have our member holiday reception. And so we look forward to seeing many of our members at that as well. And lastly, we always like to take a moment to thank our members joining us today from the Centennial Society, whose contributions continue to be the financial backbone for the club. And we really appreciate their contributions. And right now we have our Centennial campaign underway. So again, thank you to all who attended today. Special thanks to Bill and Frank. Thank you so much. And we hope to see everyone next week. So thank you.